All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm excited to have you all with us. My name is Zach Gertis. I use he, him, his pronouns. I work at the Sierra Club as a campaign representative for our Living Economy program. I'm really excited to have you all here with us to talk about a new report that Sierra Club and our partners have been working on. We've got some amazing speakers lined up as well. And in just a moment, I would like to have them all introduce themselves. But first, some quick logistics. We'll be dropping links and information into the chat as this call is going on, so feel free to stay tuned there. If you have any questions, do please drop them into the chat as well. We have folks who will be monitoring that and responding to those best as we can. But after our speakers do a little bit of speaking in just a moment, we will also open it up for some Q&A where we will try to directly address some of your questions in the chat. So please do keep dropping those in there. We'll be sharing some other relevant information and links as well throughout this call. But as you're joining, please let us know and chime in the chat where are you joining us from today. We're a little curious to see where folks are coming in from. But just before we get started, I just wanted to recognize the moment that we're in. You might know that just over the weekend, the Senate passed a big spending package to offer some much needed relief, immediate health and economic relief to millions of people who are suffering as a result of this pandemic. This was a critical step for addressing some immediate needs that people have right now in this moment. But today we're going to be talking about what comes next as we switch from relief to recovery, talking about how we address a plan for recovery that doesn't replicate the problems from the status quo and gets millions of people good paying union jobs. So I want to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves and start off with Colette.
Thank you so much, Zach. Peace, y'all. My name is Colette Pichon Battle. I'm the Executive Director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. We're located in South Louisiana, and we work Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, better known as the Gulf South, with communities of color on the front line of climate change. I'm also the anchor for the Red, Black, and Green New Deal and a part of the M4BL leadership team at the national level, and so excited to be here. I will throw it to Lenore.
Thanks, Colette, and hi, everybody. My name is Lenore Friedlander. I am Assistant to the President at 32BJ SEIU. We are a local branch of the Service Employees International Union, and I've been an elected officer in my union for the last 20 years. Really excited to be here today. Happy International Women's Day, everybody. No better day to be talking about the importance of good jobs, climate change, and racial justice. Ben, moving it to you.
Thanks, Lenore. Hey, everyone. How you doing? My name is Ben Beachy. I'm the director of our Living Economy program at Sierra Club, where I work with Zach and a team that works at the intersection of economic, racial, and climate justice. And I'm really excited to be with y'all today to talk about the moment that we're in that Zach mentioned and this jobs report. So I'll just kick us off. As Zach just mentioned, our focus right now really shifts from relief, including the package that was passed over the weekend, to recovery. And by recovery, I mean, for example, addressing the unemployment crisis. There are 10 million people right now that are out of work and another 7 million people who want a job but have given up looking for one. Unemployment among low-income households right now is right around Great Depression levels. And job losses have been particularly acute for women. And the unemployment rate for Black and Latinx workers is more than 50% higher than for white workers. But the question that we're facing today is actually not just how do we create millions of jobs? That's a critical question. But it's also what kind of economy do we want to live in on the other side of this pandemic? Do we want to go back to normal? Well, normal could mean getting to hang out with your friends and your family without masks and going to parties and movies. I think we're all eager to get back to that. But for millions of people, particularly for Black and Indigenous folks and other communities of color, returning to normal means returning to inhaling air pollution, getting asthma or cancer, shelling out most of your low-wage paycheck to try to cover medical bills, wondering how your family is going to make rent next month, and grappling with storms, fires, droughts, and other climate disasters. That has been normal for decades for millions. We cannot simply reopen the economy and hope things return to normal, because normal was fundamentally unjust, unhealthy, and unstable. We have to do better than normal. To truly build back better, we need a bold plan to create family-sustaining jobs for millions of people while building a healthier, more equitable, clean energy economy that leaves no one behind. That means confronting the interlocking crises that we are facing. You know, the pandemic has laid bare the links between our society's longstanding, mutually reinforcing crises. And these links are something that many folks outside of DC have long known because they're a great daily reality. In the Gulf South, for example, the intersection between systemic racism and climate impacts is no more theoretical than the 5 storms that battered Louisiana's Black and Indigenous communities in last year's record-breaking hurricane season. Or in the industrial cities of the Midwest, where racist redlining has led to lower wages and higher air pollution for many Black folks, air pollution that today is increasing the risk of death from COVID-19. So for millions, the links between systemic racism, economic and gender inequity, environmental crisis, and public health have been just as real as the air we breathe. We do not have the luxury of addressing just one of these crises in isolation. And we don't have to. That's the message of this new report. We have the opportunity and the responsibility to create millions of good jobs while building a more just economy. The report is based on a bold plan for economic renewal called the Thrive Agenda. Many of you have been pushing for the Thrive Agenda for months. For those of you for whom it's new, Thrive is a public investment plan to put millions of people to work building an economy that truly prioritizes racial, economic, and climate justice. And it's backed by a movement of movements. Last fall, hundreds of the nation's largest union, racial justice, climate, and other grassroots groups, we joined forces with over 100 members of Congress to launch the Thrive Agenda. That includes all of the groups represented on this call today. Right now, we're all pushing for Congress and the Biden administration to enact Thrive's plan for economy-wide investments as swiftly as possible. There is a real window of opportunity here to win this big structural change in just the next couple of months. The new report spells out exactly what a Thrive-esque economic renewal plan could look like, how many jobs it would create, and how it would help us build an economy that fosters justice, not crisis. I want to emphasize 2 big takeaways from the report. The first is that we need an economic renewal plan as big and interconnected as the crises we face. Now is not the moment for small-minded measures. We asked economists at the University of Massachusetts to model how big an investment package would need to be to meet our jobs, justice, and climate goals. And here's the result. A multi-trillion-dollar package that invests $1 trillion every year would create over 15 million good jobs. That's enough to end the unemployment crisis. Meanwhile, by investing particularly in frontline communities, the plan would counteract systemic racism and economic, gender, and environmental injustice. And by investing at that $1 trillion a year pace for a decade, this plan also would cut our climate pollution nearly in half by 2030. So again, that's 15 million people, meaning essentially everyone who's currently out of work would get paid to build a more just economy that fosters cleaner air and water, higher wages, healthier communities, and a more stable climate. Here's the breakdown of those 15 million jobs. We create over 5 million jobs to upgrade our infrastructure for clean water, affordable public transportation, and a reliable electric grid, so as to prevent the kinds of disasters like the grid failure that we saw in Texas last month. We generate 4 million jobs to expand wind and solar power, access to electric vehicles, and clean and healthy buildings. Another 4 million jobs would be created to protect our wetlands and forests and invest in family farmers who are already embracing regenerative agriculture. And finally, we'd create over 2 million jobs to invest in care for children and the elderly. This is work that is typically underpaid, undervalued, and typically performed by women of color. To make all of this a bit more tangible, we can break down those big jobs numbers to some real-world examples. For example, 500,000 workers would be employed to replace lead pipes and secure clean drinking water for all. Another 750,000 workers would upgrade our buildings to cut pollution and boost living standards, including every public housing unit, hospital, and school across the country. About 1.5 million people, that's twice the population of Detroit, would get high-wage manufacturing jobs to produce wind turbines, components for electric buses, and other clean energy goods. 250,000 workers could get jobs in programs to protect our lands and to restore polluted Superfund sites and abandoned coal mines, which would support communities from Appalachia to the industrial Midwest. The list goes on. So that's a ton of jobs. But job quality and job access matter just as much as job quantity. And that brings me to the other big takeaway I want to emphasize from today's report. It's essential that all of these investments be tied to strong labor and equity standards to ensure the new jobs help curb racial, economic, and gender injustice. In fact, the report shows that if we just pump money into the economy without concern for labor or equity standards, we'd be actively reinforcing the unjust status quo. We asked economists to break down the job creation numbers by race, gender, wages, benefits, and access to unions. And the upshot is that without strong labor and equity standards, an economic recovery package would create millions of mostly mediocre non-union jobs for predominantly white men. That's because many of the sectors that we want to invest in, whether you're talking about infrastructure or clean energy or agriculture or the care economy, many of these sectors have lower than average wage salaries, benefits, and union density. Some of these sectors pay 40 to 70% lower than the national average, or offer health benefits for less than 40% of their workers, or offer union protections for as little as 3% of workers. 3%. In addition, many of the sectors slated for investments employ a disproportionately low number of Black or female workers. Black employment is as low as 6% in some of these sectors, while women make up just 10% of the workforce in some of these sectors that would receive investments. So to counteract these systemic inequities and chart a path to a more just society, the economic recovery package must include strong labor standards that ensure new jobs come with family-sustaining wages, health benefits, and access to unions. It's critical also that the economic renewal plan require equitable hiring practices that favor people of color and women. Even more, at least 50% of the investments, half, must go to frontline communities to curb racial, economic, and environmental injustice. We need to disproportionately invest in those communities that have endured decades of underinvestment due to systemic racism and structural injustice. Now, I know that Lenore and Colette are going to get further into labor and equity standards, so I'm just going to leave that part there. Let me just conclude by emphasizing the opportunity that lies in front of us. There really are precious few moments when all of the requirements for structural change line up. Broad public support, strong organizing, elected leaders we can work with, and the kind of cross-movement unity that you see on this call today. Now is one of those unicorn moments. It's thanks to the work of organizers across the country that policymakers are now waking up to the reality that they need to deliver solutions as big and interconnected as our problems. So let's hold them to a historic task. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Lenore. The links are being dropped in the chat, both to access the jobs report, some fact sheets that go along with the jobs report, and a new calculator where online you can decide the investments you would like to see in this economic recovery package and see just how many jobs it would generate. With that, I'll pass it on to Lenore.
Thanks, Ben. And it's great to be here with you and with Colette. The report is really exciting. And as a labor union who's deeply committed to combating climate change and ensuring good union jobs, we share the Sierra Club's vision that now is the time for big, bold solutions to address inequity and climate change. And we applaud Sierra Club and the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy and all those organizations who support the Thrive Agenda for calling for a massive investment in good union jobs to take on as you mentioned, the related crises of climate crisis, economic inequality, and structural racism. And also, as you mentioned, the COVID crisis has really laid bare how structural racism pervades so many aspects of our society, from health outcomes to exposure to pollution, and to the disparities in wages and income and wealth. Because of the lack of bold action last year in 2020, millions have been pushed into poverty, homelessness, and despair, and more than 500,000 people have died from COVID, including many in our own union. Enough is enough. Our communities cannot survive reverting back to the existing patterns of exploitation, injustice, exclusion, or marginalization. And we have a chance in this moment really to make historic and transformational change. We can change the balance of power so that we are prioritizing the health and well-being of people and of the planet. So we share the vision that now is the time not to revert back to the existing patterns, but to think forward and imagine the kind of society that we want to live in, and that all people, where all people are treated fairly. But we won't get that kind of change if we don't fight for it, if we don't build together, if we don't form alliances, if we don't mobilize, if we don't take advantage, if we don't build on the momentum that we have and recognize the moment that we're in. We have to think about these issues holistically. We can't think about climate change and economic justice and racism separately. We have to see how they're related and think about how important and transformational it can be in this moment and in this economy to invest at the scale that this report calls for, and to create good jobs, not low-wage minimum wage jobs with no benefits and where people are disrespected. I want to just explain for people who may not know what SEIU is or who 32BJ is. We are the Service Employees International Union. We have 2.1 million members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. SEIU members work in public services, in healthcare, and in property services. Our members are on the front lines dealing with climate change and dealing with the COVID pandemic. 32BJ is one local union or branch in the, we are a property service union with our members who do cleaning, maintenance in office buildings and residential buildings. They're security officers, they're airport workers. And we are up and down the East Coast, and also with thousands of members in Kentucky. In our union in SEIU and in 32BJ, we see the problem of climate change as a justice issue. And we believe that unregulated corporate greed, the greed that leads to exploiting workers, paying insufficient wages, leaving millions without a safety net through the lack of healthcare coverage or retirement benefits, is the same greed that leads to plundering the planet, polluting air and water, and leaving communities ravaged, devastated, and impoverished with asthma, cancer, and other chronic diseases. Our commitment to fight for our members and for their loved ones does not start and end with the workplace. It means ensuring that all workers have a decent life and are treated fairly, both on the job and in their communities. When Hurricane Sandy hit New York and the surrounding areas, it was really a wake-up call for us. Many of our members lost their homes, the subway system was flooded, and members couldn't get to work. Hundreds of buildings were closed because basements were flooded, and electrical systems and HVAC systems and elevators were knocked out. We knew at that time that we had to do more and we had to make a deeper commitment to work on environmental justice. And as millions of union members around the country are experiencing extreme weather and the impacts of climate change, increasingly the labor movement is getting involved in the fight for good jobs and the fight to really take on the kinds of measures that we need with an urgency that we need. I want to talk for a minute about why labor standards are important. It's awesome that in this report, there's a whole section on labor standards and why it's not enough just to say we need jobs, but that we need good jobs and we need union jobs. In a society like ours, where the economic system is based on maximizing corporate profits, That business model leads to paying the lowest possible wages, providing the fewest possible benefits, creating part-time or contingent work, using contractors or subcontractors. And we see it increasingly in so many sectors in the economy. It really creates what we call a race to the bottom, where competition for work or business leads to lowering wages and benefits and even endangering workplace safety. Absent labor standards and government action that sets higher minimum wages, ensures affordable health care for all and sufficient retirement benefits, millions are forced to live in poverty or to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. Currently, more than 40% of all US workers earn less than $15 an hour. And it's a disgrace that the minimum wage hasn't been raised in years. And frankly, the recent vote in the Senate to exclude the $15 minimum wage is outrageous. But we're going to keep moving forwards here. Millions of essential workers earn less than $15 an hour. Home care workers, delivery people, cleaners, grocery workers, childcare workers, farm workers, security officers, workers who have been working each and every day to keep us all safe from COVID, but are unable to provide for their families. This report also recognizes that unions improve the wages and benefits and quality of jobs. And I recently read a statistic that the union difference is something like 11%. So that workers that have unions tend to, on average, make significantly more than workers who do not have unions. Simply put, unions are groups of workers who've come together to improve the conditions on their job. Workers who have joined together in unions have the power to raise their wages, win better benefits, improve workplace safety, and have dignity and respect on the job. Raising wages and unionizing workplaces is actually, we believe, it's good for the economy. It means people are less dependent on governmental social safety net programs, and that when people earn more, they're going to spend more. We're in a consumer economy, and that creates increasing business and a spiral up to a thriving economy. It also generates more tax revenue and supports small business. Raising wages is not a zero-sum game with employers. A high-road economy can increase everyone's wealth and do it in a way that is just and humane. The report also outlines many important projects or initiatives that can help us move toward a more sustainable planet, address the economic crisis, and achieve a just society. And I want to also point out one of the things that Ben said about a care economy. So it's not only investing in hard infrastructure projects, but also in the kinds of social services that are increasingly necessary in our society to support people at work, such as childcare or long-term care, and also to deal with the increasing health impacts that people are experiencing due to climate change, or the consequence of not dealing with climate change. Polluted air, unsafe drinking water, and living in areas that are filled with toxins or hazardous materials. We at SEIU and 32BJ are committed to continuing to work with all of you, to our partners in the environmental justice, racial justice movement, and immigrant rights movement to reach a just society. The time to think big, act big, and fight for the kinds of transformational change is now. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Colette Pichon-Battle, a colleague and comrade in this movement. Colette.
Oh no, it looks like I think Colette is having a little bit of internet issues, but hopefully she'll be able to rejoin us in just a moment. While we're waiting though, Ben, you mentioned some specifics about the jobs report numbers, some numbers about how many jobs we would like to be created, what kinds of jobs. For folks that joined late, could you share those numbers again?
Yeah, sure. Well, and I would say, first off, you're welcome to explore the numbers yourself. Our team created a really handy calculator, so you can go online, and I think the link is there in the chat, And you get to decide, what would you put in this package? What would you invest in? Would you invest in replacing lead pipes? Would you invest in making sure that we are upgrading our public housing and schools and hospitals for increased living standards? Would you try to invest in protecting our wetlands and forests? How much would you invest in each thing? Once you've decided what your investments are, what will come out is the number of jobs you just created with your economic recovery package. So it gives you, it's a tool, it's an interactive tool to give you a really good detailed sense of what we're pushing for here. But just to say, like, again, a couple of those numbers, we are, there's one single program to exchange gas guzzlers for affordable electric vehicles would yield over 635,000 jobs. That's as many people as live in Detroit. I mentioned upgrading public housing, schools, hospitals. That would employ 500,000 people. To replace lead pipes and secure clean drinking water would employ 350,000 people. Abandoned coal mines, where I am from in Appalachia, could be remediated alongside Superfund sites in cities and communities across the country. That would employ over 225,000 people, supporting communities, like I said, from Appalachia to the industrial Midwest. So just to give you some flavor of the specifics that were included in this report, I'd urge you to go into the jobs calculator, check it out for yourself. Also go into the report. There are 8 specific fact sheets that break down the numbers, offering some pretty real world tangible examples. And it looks like we've got Colette back, so I'm going to shut up and pass it right back to Colette.
Thank you, Ben. I mean, it would not be a COVID webinar without some technical difficulties. Thank you, Sierra Club, for handling that. And sincere gratitude to Sierra Club for this great report. I have to tell you, the issue in the South pre-COVID was jobs. The issue in the South post-COVID is jobs. And to see this jobs report really come out, not just with the numbers, but with the numbers that really connect to equity and connect to Black communities and connect to the South, really good job. And I think what advocates really need to push this a little bit harder and a little bit further. I also just want to honor and acknowledge, what it means to have real allies in this work, what it means to be able to hear from the unions, what it means to be able to hear from conservation groups, and what it means to be invited in as both the Movement for Black Lives and as a Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy in a long-standing relationship. Within the Gulf, we're really looking at the issue of climate change. We're looking at how to solve this problem. We're looking at the realities that we face every day. In addition to the 2020 hurricane season that was just off the charts for us, as Ben said earlier, record-breaking. We're also in active retreat and relocation mode down here in several of our parishes because of sea level rise. And we're seeing it across the Gulf in South Florida, South Louisiana. We're starting to see relocation as a reality for folks. And to tell the truth, we were not ready for the Arctic reality that came our way and that we're still dealing with now. But the truth is that climate change brings extreme weather, and we are seeing the extreme storms that come off the warmed Gulf. And we're seeing even the extreme weather from the Arctic that's dipping down into this region. We are in a situation, and climate change is the reality of the South. And so what does the question and conversation on jobs really mean? I think it means everything that we know, how this plays into income and wealth generation. But I think what we also have to start grappling with is what this jobs report and what the conversation around jobs means for our future. We can't just continue doing things the way we've done them. Nothing we're doing is big enough to match the reality and the scale of the problem. This climate challenge is a global one. We are going to need federal and national action that meets the gravity of the reality that we're facing right now. And jobs is one major piece of this conversation. The jobs that we create, they cannot be rooted in the same system of supremacy that we've seen this economy rooted in. We've got to move with equity. I'm so glad to see these standards. I'm glad to see equity mentioned. I'm glad to see it really metabolized throughout, so that we can understand that equity is not just a word or a checklist. It's something that we have to manufacture into the way that we're going to do this work. And these jobs that are calling for a 50% investment in Black communities and frontline communities. This is how you address the economic racial wealth divide. This is how you address past harms in this country. This Thrive agenda and the data that is supporting this is how we get to a new and transformed future, because we're going to need more than just the incremental steps of small changes. We're going to need massive transformation, and it's going to bring lots of people discomfort. I'm getting another understanding of inconvenient truth, this stuff, yes, it's inconvenient. Some things are going to have to change. Things are going to have to move. We're going to have to shift. Guess what, y'all? They're changing anyway. They're shifting anyway. They're moving anyway. The jobs numbers in South Louisiana pre-COVID were really around the number of oil and gas workers who were already laid off, not because of COVID, but because the oil and gas industry, and certainly the oil production side, is on the decline. It has been for a very long time. All of the lies that we've been told about how much money these industries are putting into our economy are now becoming very clear that they're not what we thought they were. And it turns out the price we're paying in the long term is not worth the short-term jobs anyway. And so we think about these jobs that we were losing even before COVID in oil and gas. Now is the time to make the transition. It's not a transition away from one job to another. It's a transition away from unemployment to livable wage employment, where you can take care of your family, take care of your community, and not kill the very land and place that you love so much in the process. Another piece that keeps coming to mind for me is in New Orleans, pre-COVID, there was an over 40% Black male unemployment rate. Well, you can put over 190,000 Black people to work, anybody, Southerners to work on these abandoned oil wells that are dripping and leaking everywhere. They're still causing problems. They're still poisoning our communities. And we're still looking at unemployment numbers that only with COVID got worse in all of the tourism-based economies across the South, especially in the Gulf. This jobs report for us means there are tangible numbers, there are tangible actions that we could take to not just put anybody to work, but to start putting people to work in an economy that is both about repair and restoration. The repair and restoration of past harms politically and economically that we've done to poor and Black and rural and Indigenous people, but also the restoration and the repair of this planet, of this land. How many brownfields and dirty, polluted places could we clean up with these jobs? How many people could we put to work to build something, not just extract and break something? There's a philosophy shift here. This is not just a moment to think about jobs as numbers. This is a moment to think about jobs as the quality of jobs that you can give to a person for decent work and the access to those quality jobs. This is monumental. And I agree with what has been said. This is an opportunity for us to not just do things as we've done them before, but to do them better and to do them in a way that doesn't just transition us, but transforms us, not just as an economy, but as a people. This is the moment that we're looking at right now. And I just wanted to say one last thing about a framework that we use at the Movement for Black Lives. The framework is invest and divest. And it's really something to think about. Now, lots of people got very nervous about defunding the police, and we don't have to go deep into defunding the police. But what I want you to understand is there was a question called. However it was called, the question was called. Do you know how your dollars are being spent? And is spending your dollars on more militarized policing what you want? Or do you want your dollars to move to other things? That same kind of question can be brought here when we think about fossil fuels and dirty energy. Why would we continue to invest in the thing that's not just killing the people next to it and it's killing the people next to it, but why would we want to keep investing in something that's killing the planet? That's us investing in our own demise, and we've got to do something better than that. Let's look at where we spend our dollars. Let's stop spending dollars on things that harm our communities. Let's start spending dollars on things that make our communities stronger. And then let's begin to repair all of the other pieces of this society that have been broken through this philosophy of extraction and taking and oppression. It's time for us to stand up, make this transition. This report couldn't make it more clear about the opportunity we have right now and about the opportunity we have at the community level. I'm excited to be a part of this. I'm excited for the conversation that comes afterwards. Let me turn it back over to Zach.
Thank you so much, Colette. And thank you, Lenore and Ben, as well. That was all really great. I think it's really spot on that we have this important moment we're in where we need to think about how we're addressing the problems and what our recovery plan looks like that doesn't return us to the status quo. We need to create millions of jobs, and not just any jobs. We need jobs that are good paying union jobs. We need to up union density, unionize folks in their existing jobs, and make sure the jobs we're creating are invested and part of a care economy that Ben was talking about, making sure that we're not destroying the planet, destroying our communities, destroying the health of our communities. All of that is spot on. And making sure we're providing investments for these jobs directly into the communities that have been hardest hit: Black communities, brown communities, indigenous communities. There's a massive problem that we need, and we're here as part of a coalition, a larger network, a movement of different groups and different people that are all trying to address this holistically and not just tackle these small issues in different siloed areas. So I'm really excited that we're having this conversation. I'm happy you all are with us. We are going to transition a little bit and talk about some questions that have been coming up, both here in the chat and that we've been getting about the jobs report in general. So for the first one, I actually want to start with one that came up in the Facebook chat, is how can we build bigger electric car infrastructure? And I think maybe to start off, I'll see if Ben, would you like to take that one first?
Sure. It was how can we?
It was can we? So I think maybe the question is that part of the plan in the report?
We definitely can. And at Sierra Club, there's a Clean Transportation for All campaign, and it's a campaign that goes well beyond our organization. A variety of unions have been pushing for investments in. Look, we have to get ahead of the curve. Like, we all know that we urgently need to be investing in access to clean and affordable public transportation. Let me just start with that before we get to EVs, because like we can talk about EVs, and we do want to talk about electrifying vehicles, but we also want to make sure, like as Colette and Lenore just laid down, this is just as much a justice plan as it is a climate plan and a jobs plan. We've got to ensure access. That's for increased mobility. It's also for increased health. We got to make sure that buses are not spewing out diesel fumes. Like I'm a biker. I don't know if you guys bike in areas where there's buses, but like we have to have clean and affordable public transit. That's number one. Number two, electrification of vehicles is totally not just a goal, but it's something that is actively being pursued right now. I think a number of our communities have been pushing for electrification of all vehicles, over the next decade. And we saw some early actions from the Biden administration suggesting that they're moving in the same direction. And so certainly within this report shows that the economic renewal plan, by supporting access to electric vehicles, would create many good jobs. I named one program, the Clean Cars for America program, is just one single line item in this big package. And what it does is it tries to provide a greater access, particularly for folks from frontline communities, to electric vehicles, making them more affordable, because right now they're not. And also ensuring that we are supporting increased manufacturing in this country of things like electric vehicles. That's also included in there, because we really need to be investing in building the clean energy technologies of the future. But it's important so that workers can capture the gains of this transition. So that program alone would create 635,000 new jobs. That right there, that's just for increased access to electric vehicles. You go beyond that and talk about charging stations, a redesigned infrastructure that is not tailored to the internal combustion engine and instead is tailored to human needs. That's a whole lot of jobs we're talking about right there. And that's just one component of an economy-wide shift, transformation, as Colette put it, that we're seeking here.
Thank you, Ben. Lenore and Colette, feel free to jump in if you'd like to respond to any of these questions as well. But I think maybe the next one, which I think all three of you would be great to answer if you'd like to, is how do we address a just transition in the oil patches, both for the workers and for the local and state governments that are currently dependent on a fossil fuel economy?
I'd like to take that one, Zach. I look forward to hearing other comments, but I'll just tell you in South Louisiana, this is a very tough conversation. I have been raised to praise and never question the oil and gas industry. But the truth is that while we've gotten some benefit, some people marginally, we've done a lot more harm than we could have ever imagined. And the transition has to be a conversation, not just rooted in what it means to shift from oil and gas to renewable, but what it means to be part of the place that you're in and responsible for the long-term damage that the jobs and the work that you do have on our environment, and not the environment as a thing that we just gawk at, but the environment as a thing that holds us and that nourishes us. So this is not easy. It's not easy to talk about on any side of the political spectrum, and oil and gas puts a lot of money into really just fueling fear. Instead of being honest and truthful about their own plans for a transition and what they know is happening, what they know globally is going to happen. That's not what they tell locals. They tell locals fight until the death for these jobs that are killing you and killing the planet. And they're not being very honest with them about what the prediction and assumption of these jobs are. And so it really puts a lot of work on the organizers to ask folks very basic questions. Do you see what's happening here? Do you see the water rising? Where did you used to hunt? Is it grass now or is it open water? And these are folks who are living right now, who grew up in places that were grass and you could go hunt deer, you could hunt lots of stuff. And now it's open water because of sea level rise. And the sea level rise only got so bad because the subsidence and the drilling and the shipping channels that are created down here to get oil and gas out of the ground and across the world have really created a precarious reality for South Louisiana. And we're having to really face that we were part of our own harm. But this can't lay on the workers. This has to shift itself to who really deserves to be held accountable, which is the industry. And I think when we have conversations around transition, all of the risks and ideas and innovation, we ought to be fining oil and gas. We ought to just make them clean up this stuff or put money into a pot. All of the coastal restoration that's happening right now in the state of Louisiana is done from fines from the BP oil drilling disaster, paid by these big companies who, by the way, didn't miss a quarter of profits. It's not like this is hurting them in any way. So I think we're going to have to start telling the truth. I think we're going to have to start telling the truth about what oil and gas really is, the good and the bad, the long term and the short. And I think we're going to have to start telling the truth about what the options are for people of South Louisiana and South Texas and all of these oil and gas states, what the options really are for a more sustainable future, not just for you and your individual life, but for your family and the lives and the generations that come after you. We've got to move away from our individualism and back to a spirit of community and really get clear about what we want to do with and for each other.
I'd like to jump in on this point as well. I think, one of the things that's exciting about this jobs report and thinking about infrastructure bill to come is the ability to target communities for investment and job creation. So in those communities that are dependent on fossil fuels now, as we move towards clean energy, renewable energy, those are communities that need to be places where there is massive investment. So there are other industries and there are opportunities for workers who are displaced from fossil fuel jobs to have a good high wage job. In a lot of the fossil fuel industries, unions have fought for and won and transformed those jobs from lousy jobs to better paying jobs because those workers had unions. And those workers deserve pension support, income support, and the ability to transition into some other kind of jobs. And with the investment in jobs at the scale we're talking about and at the scale that's needed, water lines, sewer lines, all, rebuilding schools, roads and bridges, there are tons and tons of things that need to be done to rebuild in an energy efficient way. It's not just East or West Coast cities or suburbs that have those needs. across the country. You can knock on anybody's door and anybody can come up with a list of the kinds of infrastructure that needs to be fixed. And the infrastructure has been neglected. So targeting investment to those communities that are in transition away from fossil fuels should not be left out. They should not be just left to wither and die. There needs to be attention and in those communities, and targeted investment in those communities as well, and the individual workers who are going to be transitioning out of those jobs. There needs to be support for those individuals as well. But where fossil fuel companies are the driver of the local economy, they also support the taxes that come from those jobs, support schools and the social services in those communities, in those states. So there's the individual worker situation, and there's the collective situation of communities who are historically dependent on fossil fuel, and where there's probably lots and lots of remediation of pollution because the companies have been negligent or have not done what they should have done in terms of making sure that they're not polluting the land, the water, the air, or the environment.
I would just add one quick point on building on that targeting point that Lenore said, and Colette's real world examples. Like, one number I think we all need to keep in mind and keep pushing for is at least 50%. At least 50%, half of the investments that we're talking about in this massive economy-wide package must go to frontline communities. That includes oil and gas communities where Colette's from, includes coal communities where I'm from in Appalachia. It includes principally Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color who have been disproportionately harmed by the unjust status quo, by systemic racism, by practices like redlining for generations. That is such a critical element of this plan. I mentioned this briefly, but I just think it bears repeating that if we don't do that, if we just have kind of like a justice neutral lens and just pump money into the economy without any labor equity standards, it's not just that we'll be missing an opportunity here to chart a path to a more equitable economy. We would actually be actively reinforcing the unjust status quo. We would be creating more jobs that don't have union protections. We'd be creating more jobs principally for folks that look like me, like white men, and not for folks that have been disproportionately harmed. And so it's so critical that we have investments in those communities that Lenore just spoke to and that Colette just spoke to at the first and foremost. This is not a footnote, as Colette mentioned. Justice is not a footnote. Justice is the thesis of this economic renewal package.
Thank you all for answering that. And so to Colette and Lenore, I think you've both been speaking to why this issue, why this plan and this investment directly in communities and specifically on creating these jobs is so important. I'm wondering if you'd like to say a little bit more about what this kind of economic renewal plan could mean for the daily lives of your members and of your community. Lenore, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think for working people and for the opportunity to have good jobs that make a positive difference, where at good wages with benefits and the right to organize gives working people the possibility of transforming their own lives, supporting their families, and doing something that provides the well-being of the society. I think one of the points that Colette made that's really important is that we can be in this box where we're depending on a job that's harming ourselves or harming our families or harming our community. And so thinking about the kind of investment, there's so much work that needs to be done that if we can lift up the work of a home care, a child care worker, a frontline healthcare worker, an office cleaner, a security officer, a public service worker, and turn that into a good job that is building towards a healthy and just society in a way where people can support themselves and feel like they have value. Their work is important work that can make an incredible difference. So what we need is investment on the scale that's being called for in this report. There are thousands of people who are out of work because of the COVID crisis. Just in our local alone, we have over 15,000 people who've been out of work for almost a year. And so, thinking about, in addition to the unemployment and the underemployment and that existed pre-COVID, we now have the additional economic crisis of people who have been laid off or don't have any work at all because of the COVID crisis. So now's really the time to think about how we get people back to work in a way that builds towards a more just and a healthier planet and society.
Yeah, I would add in, I totally agree with Nora's points. And I would add in, we do not thrive. We do not even get to a thought of thrive and thriving if we don't take the time to acknowledge and repair the harms that we've done. And we as a country have done harms to groups of people and to this planet. This is an opportunity to address both of those harms at the same time. And we do it through something where there's deep agreement, right? I live in the red block. There's not deep agreement on anything down here except jobs. And people take jobs that are available. They'll fight for the good jobs if we make them. If we create good jobs, people will fight for them. Right now, they've got oil and gas jobs. They're going to fight for that because there's a lot of change going on here. But there's an opportunity. The opportunity is to acknowledge and repair, to acknowledge that the fossil fuels that we pull from the core of this earth have caused a global imbalance that the industrialized nations, especially ours, are responsible for, and the whole planet is feeling it. We have to shift that. We have to shift that not tomorrow, not later down the road, now. We have to shift it now. We have to invest in our ability to repair harm now. And if you want to know what harm looks like in the long term, you look at the racial wealth divide. You look at where Black communities sit when you look at wealth by race in different family groups, and you see the extreme difference, the extreme gap between what it is to be Black in this country and what it is to not be Black in this country. We have the opportunity to address many wrongs, but especially these two, the climate crisis and the racial wealth divide, with this plan, with these numbers, with this report, and with that Thrive agenda. This is the time. If you don't believe me, and looking out at the coast of Louisiana and seeing how it is changing every day and how we have to move people, if you don't believe me, then at least believe the scientists who wrote it down and said we will reach a point of no return in less than a decade. The time is now to move on this. We don't have any more time to discuss all of the little fears that we have with the transition. We need a transformation that will get all of us to a new level of thinking about just how good humanity can be. Now is the time.
Thank you, Colette and Lenore. So it looks like we have time for maybe just one more question. And I want to go with, has the bill been introduced in the new Congress, or rather in general, what is the status of the bill right now? And maybe I'll pass it to Ben for that one.
Sure thing. So the Thrive resolution, which came out last fall, is already out there, and that is the 8-pillar plan, a blueprint for economic renewal that, again, all of our organizations and really hundreds of racial justice union and climate organizations have all signed on to. 100 members of Congress supported it. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer vowed to make it part of the governing agenda for 2021. You might have seen he was on Rachel Maddow saying this is part of the governing agenda for 2021. What comes next is indeed a bill. That was a high-level resolution, it was a high-level vision. Now we're going to spell out in details. Similar to this jobs report, what exactly should that economic renewal package look like? We're pushing for a scale for that it be as big as the crises we're facing, pushing for standards like Colette and Lenore and I all spoke to, that you've got to have high road labor and equity standards to chart a path to a more just economy rather than reinforcing the unjust status quo, and frontline leadership. That we really need to have the front lines at the front line of determining how all this money is spent. So that bill is right now being assembled, actually. So it's a very timely question, likely to be rolled out with a big splash later this month. And then Zach, you might be able to speak to this, that over the coming weeks, there's going to be a real opportunity for activists to take action to try to get their member of Congress to sign on to that bill so as to push for an economic renewal package that really is as big and interconnected as the crises we face.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Ben. So as Ben mentioned, this bill will be coming soon. And so our priority right now is making sure that President Biden and all of Congress understand just how much support the Thrive agenda and this investment directly into communities and to creating millions of jobs, let's see just how much support that plan has. So they need to see it from our organizations, they need to see it from the public and from all of you. So over the next few weeks, we're going to start pressuring our members of Congress, making sure that they know their constituents want them to support Thrive. So stay tuned for details about a coming virtual rally where we'll unveil a lot more details about the next steps and also plans for taking action when your member of Congress is back home during March recess. And that's the perfect time for them to hear from their constituents who they represent. So also want to make an additional plug for some of the materials that have been dropped in chat. You can see the full findings from our report. You can see the executive summary, some of the breakdowns on numbers that Ben has been going over, as well as our jobs calculator, where you can actually plug in what how many jobs could be created for your own community and your own ideal plan. Also want to invite folks to take some action immediately and send a message to President Biden, making sure he knows that he should incorporate the Thrive agenda into his governing agenda and to his economic renewal plan in general. I'm going to make sure that he hears from as many people as possible. He knows that he needs to take action and needs to do it as soon as possible. With that, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you all for being here. Huge thank you to our speakers, Colette, Lenore, and Ben. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. Appreciate you being here and want to say thank you all and hope you have a nice night. Bye, everyone.
Good night.